Paul Polchop is back in the studio with me, 24 hours on since we were last here. It feels like a flash. But for very important reasons you are with us, Paul, because parents worried about how Bristol deals with children with special needs are taking the council to High Court. You've been following this because today a judge has been hearing arguments about a deal struck between the City Council and the government. Critics warn it will result in damaging cuts for special education, and so they've launched this legal action. What's the deal about then? Talk us through it.
I'm going to throw in a bit of terminology here, not least because it has been floating around in various news reports. Safety valve. What is that? It's a safety valve agreement struck between the government and lots of councils who have seen the amount they spend on special educational needs and disabilities, SEND, that's kids who've got particular difficulties, grow and grow. The demand for those services has just exploded over the last 10, 15 years. I looked at one set of figures. In a decade, the number of kids who've been designated as having those special needs has more than doubled. So you can see the demand has just exploded, and it's been impossible to keep up in terms of the financing of all these special educational needs services. So what happened was the government then came and offered lots of councils, Bristol included, a deal. Look, we will give you some upfront funding. You're running at a deficit. You're spending more than you've got. And we will give you a 7-year deal, in Bristol's case, £54 million over that 7 years. And that'll help you deal with the deficit you've currently run up. But you've got to actually then trim back on some of your spending. It equates to about a 25% reduction in funding over the coming years. And that's upset a lot of parents. And I met one campaigner at the court today, the High Court in Bristol, who has long talked about this and felt strongly about it. Jen Smith is her name.
So the problem with this is it operates on cuts. And this is cuts to the support that children with special educational needs and disabilities need to thrive in education. And to cut that, because it relies on the cuts, it's just going to be disastrous for them.
How would the law then prevent councils or the government reducing spending on a service?
And this is where we get down to the really complex legal argument that I began hearing in the court today. In essence, you look at equalities legislation, for instance. That's one of the key points. They've got various grounds that they're bringing this case on, but equalities legislation is important. It says people of all abilities, but particularly those with certain disabilities, certain difficulties, must be properly catered for. Now, it's really hard to know. How do you measure what is a proper, adequate service for kids with special educational needs? That's what the judge will be grappling with in the days, the weeks ahead. But, the lawyers are confident they've got a very good case. This is Beverley, Watkins Solicitor.
Most local authorities in England certainly are not complying with their statutory duties already, and they just wait for a parent to take legal action. So if the funding is cut, that will mean that local authorities even more so will not comply with their statutory duties, and you'll see more children with special needs, probably with no education whatsoever.
Right, OK, what happened in court today then?
Lots of barristers. It's fascinating to sit at the back of Court 12 in the Bristol Civic Centre and see all these wigs lined up. I think I counted about a dozen wigs.
Oh, wow.
And that's many thousands of pounds. I think most barristers are earning several thousand a day when they're in court. I can't be totally sure there. Because this isn't just a case about Bristol. It's also Devon County Council. 2 sets of parents there are taking legal action against them, and they have rolled it all into one big court case, which is why it's going to go on for, 2.5 days, the judgment has reckoned. Today we had lawyers outlining their case. We had lawyers for the families speaking. We will also hear from lawyers for the councils, including Bristol. Important to note, we have asked Bristol, would they speak? Will they give us an interview? And they've said, I think for understandable reasons, no, they need to wait until this case has concluded and a verdict has been delivered. So they are not speaking at the moment.
OK, when are we likely to get a decision?
And that is, in that classic legal way, entirely down to the judge, who may well have other things coming up. He seemed very engaged today, I've got to say, Mr. Justice Thomas Linden, asking a lot of questions, the interchange between him and the barrister. He'd clearly read this 2,000 pages worth of information. I don't suppose he'd read the lot, but he certainly knew his way around it. But nonetheless, he will go away after the hearings this week and deliberate and research. It could be weeks, it could be months. But what's important here is the implications. They go far beyond just Bristol. its implications for councils, its implications for the government. Because I'll just make one other important point here. We're talking about Bristol City Council being hauled over the coals potentially for the way that it funds and looks after special educational needs children. But the money they get isn't from the general council tax. It's not from their general fund. Education money all comes to the government, comes to the council. They can't take it out and use it for anything else, and they can't add anything in either. Not that they've got any money to add in. That money has to all be spent in education. All the council can do is work out, do we give it to special educational needs or to mainstream schools or to things like nurseries? There are 3 different streams, and basically, if you take money from one to put into the other, you're always going to upset someone. So that's what councils are grappling with. And that's what, potentially, if they lose this case, they could be faced with some really difficult decisions.
All right, Paul, thanks very much for the update. Our political editor, Paul Boltrop.
Joe Sims at breakfast.
We're talking about your misspent youth today.